Welcome to the AV Huddle, the place for AV professionals to get the latest news, updates and stories from the leading commercial manufacturers and suppliers. Hear from end users while we dive into new technology, business strategy and innovative ways AV is shaping the sector. Let's jump into the Huddle.
Hi, good morning everybody and welcome to another episode of the AV Huddle, and today I've got Ryan on from Green Hippo. So Ryan is the Product and Development Director. He's been around, well not been around, but he's been in Green Hippo for about 8 years. He's in the UK. I know he's got a bit of a strange accent. That's probably because he's come from another country. Maybe he can fill in a little bit about that. A lot of his work and experience has been in the live events industry, particularly working in like rock and roll, touring, fashion, live events. So I'm quite keen to understand, how that is applied to other applications, in particular with AV, maybe fixed AV. So hopefully this will be a great episode to learn more about Ryan. And Ryan, fill me in anything I've missed about yourself, what you do, and then maybe you can take it into what Green Hippo is all about.
Hello, yeah, thanks for having me. So as you kind of said in your intro, I'm a live events guy. I'm a lighting guy who's come into video sort of the hard way. So starting up in the early 2000s with lighting, video was a very different animal than it is today. And in my time coming up, watching video sort of take over the world. So we always watched more of our budget go to the video screen as time went on. So as I came out of touring and live events, I felt that, well, let's go into manufacturing and joined Green Hippo, unbelievably 8 years ago. And I've been there ever since, just helping to design the next media server. I don't know if you're familiar with Green Hippo, but we're a live events media server. So we work historically predominantly in rock and roll, doing live events, festivals, fashion shows, you name it. But as time has gone on, again, video just becomes more and more pervasive, and so we find that integrators and consultants are trying to put more complex video into installations worldwide. And it turns out that a lot of the experience that we've earned and fought for in the live event space becomes quite interesting for fixed installation. So that's where I think that it's getting very exciting now, and we're starting to see that progress into the next phase as COVID has accelerated everything for every industry, it seems. But now we get into mixed reality and virtual spaces, and I think you're just going to even see more changes going on. So it's quite exciting times.
Okay, that's interesting. So you obviously do a lot of different things in a lot of different sectors. So I guess if you were to break that down a bit, coming to, I guess, from the live event sector, because I think that's where a lot of the stuff's coming from. Where would that be used? Like, give somebody who doesn't have any idea about, a live event sector, what is a sector? What are the different sectors within that space?
Well, so if you look at your classic rock concert, right? So there's going to be a sound system, a lighting system, crew, and a video wall in the back historically. And so sometimes those are all provided by different vendors. Sometimes they're provided by one big vendor. Sometimes one production house will source all that in and then provide the entire tour. But video has historically been under the lighting purview in live events, but now as it has become more specialized, we've seen video houses pop up that specialize in doing very, very bespoke, very custom video work, very complex stuff. And that began years ago, and we continue to see it evolve further today. So in the UK is actually quite blessed. We have a very in-depth and very mature market for live events rental companies, and they're innovating daily with what we're doing. So a lot of what you see today in live events in the UK, we'll see worldwide next year or the year after. Sometimes we're very much in the lead. It's quite exciting.
That's interesting. So what would you say something new? I think you touched on there about I don't know if it was virtual reality or something like that, or 3D space.
Mixed reality.
Mixed reality, yes. Yeah. So yeah. I don't know, it'd be nice to learn a bit more of that. Like, what application or use case would you see someone using that?
So I'll use a Green Hippo case. So we work with a large TV show in the US called WrestleMania, or WWE, which is wrestling. It's a very, very silly but very exciting use case, because imagine you have an entire arena just covered in video, and they have stings where they'll have 30-second to 1 minute walk-ons where the whole place goes bananas, and then they do the match. I don't want to speak too much about the wrestling itself because that's outside my knowledge base, but in those stings, that we want to make it as eye-catching and interesting as possible, but it has to stick to brand. And what we're doing nowadays is we actually will augment the physical displays with virtual elements on top of that by tracking the camera in 3D space and then adding that in through the post stream. So if you imagine you've got video on a video wall that's being played back by a hippo, somebody walks in front of that video wall, and as they walk, you can actually see things happening in camera from the perspective of the camera, and that's because they're tracking the camera in 3D space and adding it back in post, and that's called augmented or mixed reality. This is a technology that's been in football forever. You know, the technology that allows us to add adverts in after the fact, but this is now happening in live events and especially broadcasts in a much bigger way. So this is kind of where live events is headed. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And can you see an application like that being used in more of a static, scenario where it's not like a live event, but something else in a, I don't know, in a corporate world? You know, can you see that happening?
Well, so corporate, yeah. So, but pre-COVID, we were seeing a slow movement towards it with virtual conferencing and breakout spaces and things like that. COVID just absolutely lit a fire under it, and it's just happened so much faster. So we're seeing everything from an XR space, which is basically it's an LED volume where you're doing in-camera effects, all being done live, to simple sort of mixed reality setups where I have a CEO standing in front of an LED wall doing his PowerPoint presentation and everything in between. And media servers are integral to that workflow front to back. So yes, the short answer is in installations, you're seeing more and more of this. I think as it's now becoming more pervasive and it's maturing, the costs and the barriers to entry are coming down. So you're going to see, what we're seeing now is you're starting to see people expect more and more of this as time goes on. So yes, you're going to see a lot more of this in installations. You're going to see a lot more of it in corporate meeting rooms. They're going to want more than just having a telly behind your head to look nice. It's going to be a lot more in depth, and that's a space that, as we said, we figured this out in live events a long time ago, and now it's starting to come into fixed installations.
Yeah, and what do you see as the main, I guess, draw to this kind of technology, or the benefit from a corporate point of view? Because normally people just want to communicate information, and obviously videos say more than a picture and pictures say more than words. But in terms of what you're doing with the more immersive experience, what's the benefit from a corporate side there?
It's new and interesting, and anything you can do to engage your audience, I think, is a benefit. If you think about the classic corporate AGM, which we've all been to too many of them, when you've got 400 people sitting in a room, right now it's unthinkable. We could never do that right now. But hopefully this time next year we're seeing those start up again. But again, is a company going to pay to fly 400 people around the world to be in one place?
Yeah.
Do they want to deal with the carbon concerns? All these things, all that's going to come into play. And I think that as time goes on, you're going to see more and more mixed presentations where we have some people that are sitting live, but we have the people who are watching remotely have a more interesting experience than just watching something like this, a simple flat video. And immersive tech, mixed reality, that all plays a part in that. And it's not the end point, I think, but it's another step along the way where we see that the goal is that I want to make the corporate presentation more interesting, more immersive, and ultimately my audience has to retain and be interested by what I'm saying. Otherwise, what's the point? It's just a huge waste of time.
Yeah. And I guess so. In terms of your hardware, because you mentioned Green Hippo provide the hardware, and you pull in all the information from all the different sources, and then I guess is it complicated, or is it simple for somebody like an AV integrator to pick up, plug it all in? Do the software?
It's simple or as complicated as you want to make it. I mean, it really depends. I mean, a simple LED wall playback system is quite simple. Yeah, I mean, we pride ourselves. Our product is designed to be able to pick it up and use it. For a simple LED wall with seamless crossfading, it'll work out of the box. To do an in-depth mixed reality camera tracked setup, that's something else entirely, and it would take quite a bit of skill and quite a bit of knowledge to do it. So I think what we're seeing now is we're very much in the trailblazing phase of some of those more complex workflows. And as time goes on, as the technology matures, as it becomes easier, you're going to see it kind of trickle down. And some of the work we're doing now is very much along those lines, where we're trying to take workflows and simplify them and try to find, the key bits of it that we can strengthen and make easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously you've worked in different sectors. Where do you see, especially with the markets changing now, the biggest growth in a particular sector? So if someone's listening to this and they're listening to this and they'll say, actually, we should be getting into that sector, or we're in this sector, we should look at what's possible with Green Hippo. What would you say is happening in the market right now, where it's going?
Good question. For media servers, last year was not a great year for live events for obvious reasons. Hopefully year over year, I think live events is going to stage a comeback this year and into next, as the CapEx cycles come back. There's a lot of interesting growth prospects. I think that there's a huge opportunity for growth in entertainment, what I would call the entertainment sector, which are people that are doing entertainment venues. So these can be theme parks, these can be shopping malls in the US where they're building these enormous immersive spaces. There's an enormous appetite for people to be entertained. And ultimately, what you're seeing is if you have in your home, your living room, essentially, if you have a big TV, you're getting a really good experience out of that TV. And the challenge we have is to get you to come out and watch my entertainment. It needs to be that much better than your TV. And as your home experience keeps improving, the onus is on us to create a better entertainment experience, immersive, interactive. Really, that's where it's going to be, I think. So as time goes on, this arms race between your telly and entertainments is where it's going to be, and it's going to pop out in cruise ships and theme parks and shopping malls and retail, you name it.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. So I think it's just becoming more. I guess it's always been experience based, but it's more about bringing people into interact. Would you say is that some way of getting people to?
That's a word. That's definitely a buzz area, I think, is interactivity. What that means in practice is always a challenge. It's like, how do you interact? You're never going to interact with a cinema. You're never that's never going to work.
Yeah.
But interactivity in the retail space that I've seen a lot of, for example, is saying, how can I stand in front of a mirror and the mirror will show the clothing I want to look at, what it looks like on me. That kind of interactivity, that's pretty basic, but it does work. And I think it does add a value. So we're seeing more and more of that sort of trickle in. And again, media servers have applications for that. So it really depends on what we're talking about. Theme parks are another area which is looking heavily into virtual work, which is basically you're on a ride and we're going to add a video element to it. Harder than it sounds, as it turns out, technically, but it is something that's being looked at.
Okay, that's interesting. And is there any, I guess, new technology that nobody's heard of or that's happening? Because people have heard of AR, VR. Like, is there something else that's happening in the I don't know, video?
Well, it's always new technology, right? So I think the big disruptive technology we're seeing for media servers is generative. So the old paradigm was, if I had a video screen, I would go into my content creation package of choice and I would create a video, put it in the media server and play it. And we can do that today, no problem at all. The problem is making that interactive, making that immersive, making that first of all, the content pipeline is difficult, but then when you want to layer on top interactivity, you want to layer on top immersion, it starts getting a lot harder. And also if you start talking about really big canvases, so we're doing a lot of 8K plus content playback, content delivery for that sort of thing is non-trivial. So another workflow starts to come into its own, which is basically I want to create the content on the fly. So I want to create, instead of saying, here's my my movie clip, I'm just going to play it back. I'm going to play back. I'm going to have a generatively created look. So it could be just rain falling as kind of the most simple aspect of it. And once you've done that, then you can actually do really cool things with it. So for example, a project we did, I can't actually say who it is, but one of the projects we did was basically a projection on a wall in a corporate environment, and you would have rain falling down the wall. That's all done generatively. But it turns out there was an elevator door in that wall, and if it would open, the rain would part around it. But and instead of, you could do it the hard way, you could actually pre-can the content and make it do that, but that's very hard to do. So instead you can do it generatively and just change the way the content is rendered in real time. That's a simple example. As time has gone on, and again, we did this in rock and roll quite a bit. Now it's kind of come into fixed installations using, and you're going to hear buzzwords like Unreal, Unity. These are generative engines, gaming engines that are basically creating that content. And as the number of people who become comfortable with this increase, as the complexity increases, as the amount of technology we can start kind of mushing it all together increases, you're going to see more and more work being done generatively, I think. So that's sort of the big buzzword that's going to encapsulate a lot of what you see over the next year or two.
That's really interesting. And I guess obviously the other question is, with your role doing product and development director, where do you get your ideas from in terms of developing the next stage of the product? How do you
Well, yeah, you can lead and you can follow. I think that there's we're lucky because our market is extremely competitive. So there's no shortage of ideas. There's no, we're not in a everything is obviously everything is very cost competitive, but at the same time, the way we differentiate ourselves from our competition is by feature set. So we try to be very easy to work with. We have specific workflows that are unique to us and that our users value, and then that is different from my competition. So what ends up happening is we can work along that. We can kind of work along that path and really strengthen our offering, and it builds benefits. Um, Currently so we have a couple different development initiatives ongoing. One is obviously to reap the benefits of the new generative pipelines that are coming out, and sort of what does that do? How do we how do we create some new opportunities with the mixed reality, augmented reality technology I mentioned? Also, we need to keep up with the changing hardware technology. So graphics cards, motherboards, that stuff all changes constantly. So we have to keep updating our offering. So between all those things, we work pretty hard just to keep moving, basically.
Yeah, no, that's good, I guess. Understanding the market dynamics, but also getting feedback from the customers and what's happening.
Yep.
I think it's good because I get, from a market perspective or consumer, they always want the best and the leading. I think if there's healthy competition, it always helps with development.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of competition in the space. Trust me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it. I think that what's interesting is if we look at it from, it's a very different world in fixed installation than it is from live events. Live events is very much on the bleeding edge of a lot of different technologies. Fixed installation is both it's much more focused on specific aspects of what they need. So they need a very specific thing, and they need to do it well. They need to do it 24/7, 365. They need to have low maintenance requirements. So there's a heavy crossover with what we do in live events, but the two aren't completely unique to each other. It isn't totally mutually exclusive. So we need to be very careful when we look at some of the fixed installation projects and make sure that what we're looking at is saying we can do this cool thing, and we can do a lot of cool things, but I need to be able to do this cool thing in a way that a untrained service engineer can run it for the next 3 to 5, 10 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we've spent a lot of time over the last 5 years building out the feature set, building out our support architecture to allow that to happen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And does that mean you've got separate products for these different sectors, or would you offer the same product, to both live events? Or
so our product line is it's computers, right? So we build from very small computers to one U to 4 rack units size. The smaller units are more aimed for an installation customer. They tend to be too small to be able to do anything credible in the fixed in live events, I should say. But the two cross over for each other, and that's because ultimately there is a lot of crossover requirements. So, both fixed installation and live events need to have robust hardware that can live in dusty, dirty environments for years on end without complaining. So that works out quite well for us, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. And I guess my other question, which is just slipped my mind now, but we were talking there is, it was you mentioned graphics card, and I know there's a global shortage at the moment with graphics cards. Mainly with the silicon manufacturers and the chips. Has that had an impact with?
Oh yeah, no, we have. I mean, you would be amused probably to hear about the problems we've had. So we've had NAND shortages, which is what an SSD is made out of. We use very specific SSDs. We had a NAND shortage when a gas pipe blew up in Taiwan a couple of years ago. There's a flood that took out a bunch of factories. Now we're having graphics card problems because of there was not enough supply coming out of TSMC and Glowflow, but also Bitcoin is starting, cryptocurrency mining is starting to vacuum up all the supply. So yeah, we have problems with that. I mean, the good news is we're paying top dollar for the best graphics cards money can buy. So we're affected last in a lot of ways, but it does affect us. But I mean, we're buying the very top end AMD and NVIDIA cards because that's what our customers demand.
Yeah. And where is manufacturing for Green Hippo?
We have 3 different facilities. We have 2 facilities here in the UK, and we have another facility in the US. We build locally to the market to provide faster service.
Yeah. And what geographically areas do you cover then?
So we're worldwide. So predominantly, I would say that the business is split, not evenly split, but it's split between the US and EMEA APAC. So we have our R&D base and most of our research and development and most of our product activities are based out of the UK or the US. We have some support people scattered around the world. But yeah, anything that's built is coming out of the UK or the US. But we do sell quite a bit into Europe, quite a bit into the Middle East and into Asia.
Yeah. Do you find like the Asia market's a bit more advanced from the technology side in terms of what they're after? Um,
Um, it really depends. I mean, we do a lot in broadcast in China at the moment, and I'd say Asia, and I think it's sort of a misnomer to say Asia because that's not fair. I'd say there's China and there's not China, because actually I think the old APAC acronym is not fair either because Australia is very different than China, which is very different than Indonesia.
yeah.
But China has its own kind of set of requirements. Their broadcast industry is pretty advanced. They're using quite a bit of our equipment. Whereas we don't get a lot of, we personally don't get a lot into into installations there. We haven't really tried either, but we just haven't. Um, yeah, it's just a very different market. I think that they're sort of very insular in their workflows, and we don't get a lot from them at the moment in terms of there's not a lot carrying over, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess, once the pandemic is kind of done and dusted to some extent, and and live events starting, what is next for Green Hippo? What does the future look like?
Well, I mean, more of the same, more hippos. So we, as I said, the development effort at the moment is focused on really leveraging some of the new technologies that are coming out. We've been very lucky through the pandemic, unlike other kind of, I would say, live events companies. We've managed to maintain a steady cash flow because we have hands in so many different pots between fixed installations and live events.
Yeah,
So we've been lucky to keep the team going. We've been able to keep everybody employed, and keep developing. So we've been doing that. We're scaling back up in support now. We're starting to have sort of see the world turning back on again, which is really, really good news. So we're expecting a busy festival season this year in the UK, which will be very good to see and see our friends out working again. So I think that there's going to be a couple different forces pulling at us as this happens. Obviously we're going to start focusing on just supporting these guys, which have been quiet for over a year now. At the same time, a lot of the work we've been doing in the background for the last year is starting to come to fruition. We have a new software release we're putting out, which is a new visualization system, a new timeline control system. That's all going to be popping out in the next couple of weeks, hopefully. But that represents over a year of work from the team. So yeah, there's a lot of just the steady, continuous metronome of progress. We just have to keep pushing forward.
yeah. Okay, that's interesting. And if somebody who does fixed installations, which is, I guess, more where our background is, and listening to this, if what would you say to them? What wise words or tips would you give them in terms of what you're offering that can match fixed installations? Maybe.
Yeah, so I think that what's interesting is having spoken to many, many consultants and integrators, one of the key challenges with fixed installations seems to be, and I could be wrong, but I feel like it seems to be providing an end-to-end solution. So there's plenty of players out there. There's plenty of things that play video, and that's not, I mean, we all know that. But what we find is that actually something that we had to do in live events a long time ago is there's never enough time in a live event to do the load in or do the testing or do the programming. So what ends up happening is a lot gets done beforehand in pre-visualization, where they actually will set everything up in a virtual world, test everything, even pre-program it, look at it, validate it, and then go to site and do it. And that's all bred out of the fact that there just isn't enough time in the arena. The arena costs too much money to have everybody sat there for a week just pre-programming. And I think the same sort of workflow in a fixed installation could be quite valuable, because I think that especially as the video in fixed installation moves beyond your simple 16:9 screen and gets towards complex projection mappings, interactive exhibits, you need to test it. We all know the old adage, right, is that the integrator goes last, right? So if the masonry is falling behind, if plumbing is falling behind, you're stuck. So all of a sudden you're the one holding you're the one without a chair when the music stops because the whole thing is late. So if you go into site fully prepped with everything pre-visualized, you know what it is, you've already got the client to sign off the look and feel of it. It's just a case of getting everything physically done. That saves you a lot of time and actually ultimately will save you a lot of risk. So I think what we see as a huge value for Green Hippo in that space is providing that end-to-end solution. So we plan, prepare, and deliver. So we give you the planning tools. We have the preparation tools as well to pre-program, to validate it, to test it with your customer, to get it signed off. And then when you actually deliver it, you walk in on hardware and say, right, okay, off you go. And that last phase, the delivery phase, can be quite quick. And I think that's really important because it means that the valuable time you have on site is not spent testing content, because you shouldn't be doing that. You should have done that weeks ago, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes really good sense. Makes really good sense. And I think it's interesting to see how different sectors adapt differently, maybe because they're forced to do it.
Yeah.
And I think there's actually great learnings to be had from that. So I think there's some wise words there. That's really useful.
I mean, it's interesting. We've seen it. We had a few projects. Sorry to interrupt you. We've had a few projects in the U.S. over the last 6 months where this really came into its own. And actually, the reason was again COVID, because the restrictions on site meant that they didn't want to have more than X number of people working. And so what ended up happening was it basically was one company could go in and do something and then they would leave, and another company come in and do something and then they would leave. So what ended up again, what the end result of all that was, is the amount of time that they had to set up and program was vastly reduced. So we had to go in pre-programmed. And I think that's where we saw it live, is that the visualization piece of that then becomes critical.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense, and some great wide words there. You mentioned one thing there, projection mapping. What is that?
Projection is a good question. So projection mapping is when you squirt a projector anything but a projection screen, I think is ultimately the easiest way to describe it. So kind of I think it's sort of in parallel with the world of being bored of your 16:9, 16:10 screen. People have been projecting basically any unfortunate building could have a projector pointed at it. We'll put video on it, and that's an entire ecosystem all its own, right? There's entire content creation pipelines. We have to 3D scan the building. All that work has gone from being quite challenging to now actually being really mainstream. So you're seeing projection mapping really becoming its own sort of use case. And Hippo has long done projection mapping. So we have a tool set inside of our system called Shape, which is a 3D world designed for projection mapping. It was designed for architectural projection mapping in theme parks, and it drives some of the most striking and most kind of pervasive examples of that to this day. But as time has gone on, that has actually had to become more complicated. So we have to handle more complex content workflows. We have to handle big surfaces. So you're talking, 8K plus raster playbacks, multiple projectors, automatic alignment, automatic blending, all these sort of value adds. So something that's become, what started out life as being relatively simple and straightforward, has now become this very feature-packed offering that again, I think has a huge interest in fixed installation.
Yeah. I guess in my head, when you're saying that, it reminds me of like where you got these buildings and you project an image on a building and things are happening on a building. Like, I don't know.
Yeah. I think so that the classic example of the building collapsing because you projected all that and the monsters coming out the windows, and a lot of what's the hardest part with that sort of use case and kind of the why I think a lot of us who've been doing this for a while kind of roll your eyes at it is because that's all clever content. It's very clever content. It looks great. The audience loves it. But really, it's down to a clever content creator doing it. The value, so we don't have a monster come out of the wall window, come out of the window button. That wouldn't make any sense for a media server. The value we would add to that is creating the mapping, the 3D mapping to allow us to add projectors, handle changes on site, rapidly align everything to ready for show. However, as generative content has become more and more pervasive, that is where you're seeing some really interesting movements in projection mapping. And I think that the generative world is going to start, as the two collide, and they already are, especially in live events, you're seeing really, really creative, really amazing things popping out of projection mapping very quickly. So that's quite cool. But a projection mapping is a very common use case for a media server, especially in fixed installations.
Well, that makes sense. I think coming to the end of my questions, really, my last question maybe is more of a personal one. Is you mentioned you've been to a lot of rock and roll gigs and touring and fashion shows and events. What has been your best kind of event you've been to?
That's a good question. I mean, every event has its challenges, and I think that's true of every show we all work on, right? And I think that there's bits you can be very proud of. I did some projects in the Roundhouse here in the UK in Camden, and we installed a video wall that was probably 2 times bigger than it should have been to fit in that space, and made it work around all the columns and everything, and just didn't rip the roof down. And that was kind of, you walk away saying, hey, that was a thing. And you walk, and then you're able to stand in the audience and say, that's amazing. No one's ever seen anything like this before. So there's always moments like that. Pushing technology to the limits is always really exciting. I remember we did a halftime show. This was in 20 years ago, where we were running ArtNet networks, which is a data network for DMX lighting, running that over 2 kilometers, and that was a major issue back then. And nowadays we do it kind of out of hand, so it's fun to watch it. It's grown so much, and it's become so much easier in a lot of ways. But again, the complexity's moved on. We're now pushing the boundaries over there now, if that makes sense. So
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. Cool, Brian. No, thank you very much. It's been really interesting, and it's great to learn how different industries are bringing technologies across. And I think one of the main benefits there is that it's not something that's brand new and people are a bit cautious of. Like it's unproven. I think it's great because you've got a piece of solution that's worked in another sector and has been for many, many years, and you're just taking that and just a different application and a use case.
Yeah,
So
I think that's a good way to summarize it. I think that the fact of the matter is that the technology is only as good as we can use it, and I think that the challenge has always been we've discovered this the hard way, right? Is it's always if you have a lot of clever people doing for some of the largest rock and roll concerts, which are pushing the boundaries of what's possible, you've got a lot of clever people doing things no one's ever seen before, and that is a lot of fun, and it's a lot of fun to be part of that team. But taking that technology, taking those workflows and making them available to the masses so that we can see them in your high street store or a building at night, that's where we're seeing. I think that's really exciting as well, and I think that that's what you're seeing now is you're going to see a lot of that technology, a lot of those workflows trickle into day to day, and that's where Hippo is here to help.
Cool, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. And if anybody wants to get in touch or learn more, what's the best place and how to do that?
Probably an email, info@green-hippo.com. That gets to everybody. There's a couple of I'm really lucky to run a product team, which is a bunch of people that do nothing but help people out in all sectors, and we all just sit there and try to solve problems, which is a lot of fun. So yeah, you'll get to that group.
Cool, brilliant. Cool. So thank you very much, Ryan. It's great to have you on and learn more about Green Hippo and all the technology.
Thank you. All right. Have a great one. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the AV Huddle. Don't forget to like, comment, follow, and subscribe to get the latest AV updates. AV Huddle, powered by AVM Solutions.